transform at the speed and scale Bara is asking for. I'm here in Detroit to get a first-hand look at the future of an American icon and to get to know the architect of that future, who, naturally, drives an electric vehicle the size of a tank.
I gotta say, you driving a Hummer is pretty badass.
That's what I'm going for, like badass soccer mom.
Now, you were born and raised in the burbs, Detroit burbs.
Yes. I grew up with the industry when my dad would be working. Every now and then he would get to bring a vehicle home and like the whole neighborhood would come over. So definitely it's a vehicle town. He and I together have over 80 years.
All right, so folks, again, welcome. Today we are talking, our special lunch section is on the new security agenda. And we're going to explore how the sophistication of AI and emerging technologies have led to a new world of security threats for organizations like yours. And we'll hear from some of the experts on how you and your organization can remain vigilant. My name is Tom Giles. As the announcer said, I oversee global technology coverage for Bloomberg, including our cybersecurity team, which includes 8 reporters and editors across North America and Europe. You will hear from some of them today. You've already heard from some of them. And in just the last week alone, we have been chasing down leads on the notorious Lockbit ransomware gang, accused of attacking more than 2,500 victims. The emergence of generative AI tools, helping intelligence officials analyze top secret data. And you might have heard about the blunt messaging from Microsoft on the urgency of prioritizing security in the wake of some stinging criticism. And just today, in case you missed it, Katrina Manson was on stage with Jen Easterly and managed to break some news just today. So please do check that out. We're excited to touch on themes like these and many more in the next hour. A few logistics during the program. You're welcome to submit questions through your phones. Please take those out, scan the QR code here. There it is. And then jump to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to your questions. You are also welcome to take notes, pictures, and if you're avid on social media, please share them using the hashtag Bloomberg Tech. Now for a conversation on what keeps him up at night, please welcome George Barnes, Cyber Practice President at Red Cell Partners and former Deputy Director of the NSA, along with Bloomberg's Katrina Manson.
Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
Yeah, great to be here with you and some very fine salmon that I see
I'm
coming
getting
around.
hungry.
And all of you. So, George, it was explained to me in no uncertain terms that you know where all the bodies are buried. And normally that's a joke. But it's actually maybe.
Some bodies.
You are, there you go, an admission. You've been at the NSA, you're out now, but you're at the NSA for 36.5 years. You were deputy director for 6 years. And as you told me, at the time that Edward Snowden's revelations came out, it was specifically your tools that he stole and revealed. So you've lived this extraordinary time inside the NSA, and we're really glad that you've left so that you can share with us all of the secrets.
Exactly.
You're now in the private sector, and I just want to start with this. There is so much discussion of public-private partnership, and I think it means a huge number of things to different people. I think it's used as a way of complaining and cajoling. What, when you were in the NSA, did you wish the private sector was doing? And now that you're out, what do you wish the NSA and the intelligence community was doing for cybersecurity that it's not already doing?
Sure. Great question. It was interesting to watch the evolution of the relationship, and I'll call it a relationship because initially it was, like was mentioned in the Bumble thing, it was transactional. There wasn't trust. And the only things that went were they were metered out, and whether that was metered out by the government or metered out by industry, it was because there was a lack of comfort. On the government side, of course, there was a lack of comfort in exposing how we got the information, And on the industry side, there was concern about liability or reputational damage in acknowledging that something happened to you. Well, we know it happens to everybody now, so that's gone. And we know that the government and industry both have emerged and evolved to a point where they both have information that's extremely useful, but together the information is powerful. And so neither side has the totality of the information that's required to take action, but when you combine both together, it enriches the potential of getting to the right outcomes.
I spent the week talking to industry players, to government players, and Director Coker said we still haven't quite got this public-private partnership right. There's a ways to go, and industry is definitely saying you could still be sharing more.
Yes.
How do you see that? What actually needs to change, and is it going to change, or are we going to talk about it pleasantly?
Yeah, you can always share more. The other challenge is we don't know everything we need to know, and so all of us are resource constrained given the size of the threat that's coming at us day in and day out. You all know where most of the threats come from: Russia, China, a little bit Iran, and North Korea. NSA, speaking for just NSA, is overwhelmed with trying to align the priorities within just general intelligence production for combat support, for policy formulation, and for cybersecurity. And so it has to divide down all the resource base it has, and those resources are never enough. And NSA enjoyed lots of support from the current administration, the prior administration. In general, they get a good, robust budget, but as we all know, the size of the threat continues to manifest itself. And that's where technology really is coming to fore and really helping to intensify the ability to do more with the same amount of money.
When you look at that moment, that Edward Snowden moment, it was so combative, but not just for him, it was combative between two sections of the industry. And now here the NSA is, I go to DEF CON, the NSA is there, Black Hat, there are RSA, you're everywhere. How have you done this? How have you were the least popular people ever. We know you're not stealing. We know you are listening to a lot of things. We know there's controversy about the extent to which any US person data can be collected. What is this transformation about? How have you pulled it off?
Well, I think the first thing Snowden did teach us is you cannot assume that people trust what you're doing. And I came into the NSA right out of university. I spent my whole formative adult life there. And when I started, we were trying to actually bring the Cold War to a head, which luckily we did collectively with our allies. And then we went into the terrorism phase. And so through counterterrorism, it was easy for those in NSA to just conclude, hey, we are doing God's work. We're trying to prevent bad things from happening. Why wouldn't anybody trust what we do? And so that was a gross miscalculation. And I think what Snowden did is he filled the void that we were not filling. We had no communication agenda. We assumed people trusted what we did. We assumed that they would just not need to know the authorities we had and just let us do the right things. And I used to actually watch CIA get called out all the time, and we always kind of hid behind them. They got all the press, and we just quietly did our work. So Snowden really exposed our inability to connect with the public. And because he got the microphone, he made assertions that luckily were disproven by commissions that were commissioned by President Obama at the time to come in and look at our compliance regime, look at the data holdings we had, look at how we did do things that we were doing within the authorities we were given.
Not everything he said was disproven, and he did show a lot of your tools and the extent
no, most
of
definitely.
surveillance.
He showed tools. But the things that he did wrong were the assertions of broad collection on the U.S. persons, for instance. And so that was way overblown. And so those are the things, not having a public persona, it was hard for us to build from really the basement to create trust and transparency. And so a lot's happened. The ODNI just put out its most recent transparency statistics, which all the agencies contribute to every year. We're proud of that. I'm proud to show what we do. We have nothing to hide. We're within a legal regime, and I think that's good for all of us. And it's unlike the adversaries we face who really have no checks and balances.
Does the NSA need to have information from data centers to do its job?
Data centers meaning?
Data centers.
Most definitely. I mean, NSA has its own data centers, and so NSA built its own cloud computing stack.
But do you need to eavesdrop other data centers to do your job?
So NSA uses the least invasive means possible to get the information responsive to the requirements. And so if that information is somebody talking on their telephone or texting on their apps or holding their data in a data center off in a foreign land that we've been asked to target, wherever the information is, that's where we need to go. But we don't harvest in bulk. You know, we're very precise, unlike a lot of the verbiage that comes out, even with FAA 702, which was undergoing reauthorization in the last months. A lot of adjectives characterize NSA as bulk collection, and under 702, it's extremely precise with 3 orders of checks and balances. You can't just vacuum. You have to have an entity you're going for and have it substantiated before you can actually task to get content for that entity from a service provider. So it's very specific.
I know NSA is much more public than it used to be, but obviously Senator Wyden had huge concerns about that reauthorization of 702 and said that it could effectively require people who clean buildings, who work in buildings, to spy on their own employers and reveal that information. I think that was something of a thought experiment, but his point was there is nothing in the language that prevents that, and the reporting showed that it was probably about data centers, but no one came out and told the American public. So there's still a deficit of I think, that trust.
Yeah, and we have a ways to go. And I think we need to continue to be transparent with how we use the authorities. We need to be transparent on where they fall short. Our adversaries know our authorities much better than the American public and much better than most of Congress, unfortunately. And they use that knowledge to work right at the edge, just beyond the limits of our authorities. And they do that right within the U.S., much less overseas.
Let's come to China. How have you watched China evolve its techniques over the years, the decades that you've been at NSA? And can you tell us how you first saw this picture of Volt Typhoon, of pre-positioning in U.S. critical infrastructure, and how seriously you take it? The government is talking about it a lot. They've given us no sense of how many cases there are, anyone specific that's actually suffered. How are we to believe that this is really such a serious problem that we should all throw out our old routers?
So I watched China's evolution of computer network operations mounted against the U.S. For over a decade. They started very sloppy. It was very easy to find them. They were unsophisticated. They were kind of more brute force. But the one thing that China does do is they create long-term strategies, and they're willing to forsake a near-term gain for a long-term gain. And so they will watch, learn, and listen, and evolve. And so taking forward, that's the state they were in, say, in 2011, which was very rudimentary. Today, as I think everybody could attest, they're extremely sophisticated. They have tens of thousands of humans. They have farms of supercomputers. They're evolving their algorithms by training not only the intelligence, but of course we know that they actually train on their own people. All that knowledge is amassed to create this engine that is threatening every aspect of our livelihoods here. And the big thing, given where we are in San Francisco, that I've really been harping on is just this whole concept of getting our intellectual property. You know, the seed corn of America starts with the innovation engine that America has created and our Western allies for all these years. China sees much of that as in its national security interest to get. The U.S. doesn't do that. We target governments. We don't target industry for economic gain, for stealing IP to give to our companies to market back against everyone else. And so there's a big difference in that. Taking forward to what you've heard in Volt Typhoon, that's the continued evolution in China of cyber in much of the world. Cyber not just for espionage, but also for the future of warfare. And so that's an evolving space. Volt Typhoon was evidence that China not only has computer network operations, attack operations as part of its evolving doctrine, but it's exercising that quietly but surely in our own infrastructure.
Do you think they really could stop everything everywhere all at once, which is what one CISA official has said?
Well, I think the problem is we don't know. It's all we can do to find the exploits. These exploits don't look like the typical exploits we've trained ourselves to look for. Most exploits that we all have looked for forever work to collect data, whether that's commercial data, personally identifiable information, governmental information, but you have command and control, you have exfiltration. Those are all telltale signs you can train algorithms to search for. When you're embedding attack capabilities. Basically, you have an ingress, you lay it down, you test it, and then it lays latent. And you only have to revisit every so often to make sure it's still there. So the observables are much different. And so it's really hard for, and especially where they're hitting areas in critical infrastructure, as we heard earlier today, that have not had the awareness of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. They haven't had the money for modernization. They haven't had the talent. And so collectively, we need to bring all of that to bear for our critical infrastructure providers.
I want to thank attendee number 136 for an excellent question. Should US companies' AI models be under export control?
That's a very good question. I mean, we heard a little bit of discussion on Llama this morning and this whole balance between what's open source and what's not. I'm very conflicted because on the one hand, I see the power of open source for our liberal democratic world of the West, but I see the opposite end of that, where the Chinese government can take those same models, perfect them, train them, and apply them back against us. And so it's a big quandary in our society because we actually operate against different mindsets, different rules, and that's part of the thing that keeps me up at night. Where are we headed, right? We have this beautiful thing that we've created over decades in the West, and we have two big nations and a few smaller ones that are pulling us in the wrong direction. If you look at ransomware and what that's done to our society, data theft, not a day goes by that you don't hear about breaches, theft. What are the repercussions? And so we have to make defense better, we have to communicate better, but I think we need to find ways to put pressure back to the source of where this came from. And so, you know, the current administration has done a great job in bringing the whole of cybersecurity into the fore, but I think we have to go further, unfortunately.
How has the NSA been using AI, and how has this generative AI moment affected the tools? What was it like sitting inside the NSA as that happened?
So, as you would imagine, we all talk about generative AI as though it's the new thing. It is the new thing with the large language models and the generative pre-trained data sets. But different aspects of AI have been evolving for many, many years. And as you would imagine, NSA has been evolving its own applications of AI for many years inside. The big change now is what happened with industry here, basically here in California, dedicating ourselves to amassing the compute required to get the benefits out of a pre-trained model that now we are all finding ways to use. All of us are finding ways in every walk of life, and as the gentleman said earlier this morning, don't start with, I have a model, how do I use it? Start with a problem I have to solve. Can a model or an integration of that model help me solve a problem? And so every aspect of society in the modernized world can find ways and will find ways to use generative pre-trained models, including intelligence.
I know the NSA is always very focused on recruitment, and it's a big problem. You have a very interesting solution to that in your family.
Yeah. My daughter works for NSA. She went to industry for 2 years first, and then she actually surprised my wife and myself at Christmas. There was a letter on the Christmas tree, and it was her acceptance letter, and so it was a neat surprise. But she loves it. She took a 40% pay cut, but the happiness factor is 10 times what it was before, so she loves it.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage Michael Mestrovich, Chief Information Security Officer at Rubrik, Wendy Whitmore, Senior Vice President and Head of Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks, and Charlotte Wylie, Senior Vice President and Deputy Chief Security Officer at Okta, with Bloomberg's Margie Murphy.
Being here, thank you so much to my panelists for being here today. It's safe to say you guys, if anyone was to know anything, it would be you guys. You are at the forefront of the emerging threats in cybersecurity that we're seeing today. which is what we're here to talk about. So I wanted to start with Wendy. You know, Unit 42 is frontline. You are dealing with your consulting. You are responding to cybersecurity incidents. What have you seen in the past 12 months that's been particularly concerning to you?
Yeah, so Ed, great setting the stage, right? So a little bit more background, right? My teams are on the ground 24/7 working with our clients. We're investigating breaches, we're correlating threat intelligence, and we're hunting for new attacks across the world on a 24/7 basis. I heard the question asked earlier about why are these attacks being successful? You know, why does every major breach that we've seen in the news, you know, many of which our teams are on the ground responding to. And the reality is it's because criminals are making money by stealing our data. And it is far more expensive for organizations to defend against these attacks than it is for the attackers to propagate them. So what are we seeing? Increased scale, increased speed in particular, sophistication as well. But from a scale perspective, it's nearly impossible to understand every single software application you have in your environment. What hardware exists in every single department? What does your external attack surface look like? And each of those are avenues into these organizations. And now from a scale perspective, it's incredibly more challenging on a daily basis. And speed, these attackers are moving very quickly, right? We're talking about hours to exfiltrate terabytes of data in many cases. So it's becoming incredibly more challenging for organizations to respond to this at a comprehensive scale. And when we look at cyber criminals, these are not attackers that are in a basement. They are living in penthouses now. That paradigm has really shifted.
And Michael, I'll bring you in. You know, Rubrik was very open about being the victim of a ransomware attack last year. It was Clop ransomware gang. So you understand what it's like to kind of be on the receiving end of that, as well as advising, obviously, your customers as a cybersecurity company. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, any updates that you had there in terms of the attackers, anything that you've learned from how to respond, and maybe things that you've changed at Rubrik as a result?
I mean, the incident was relatively small and contained, so the incident response team worked. The incident response plan works very, very well. We had, I would argue, a reasonable communications campaign to customers about, you know, what transpired. We had a number of different internal calls with various different customers who were looking for more information, and I think we facilitated that quite well. I think the thing that, you know, is prevalent in the industry today, or in the cyberspace today, is cyber criminals aren't breaking in. Predominantly, they're logging in. And so where I came from in the federal government, spent a number of different years with teams that looked at very comprehensive insider threat detection programs, looking for a bad actor who is a member of your community. But you fast forward to today, and with cyber criminals using legitimate credentials to log into organizations, it's really not so much, so this world is blending. I need to now look for behavior of all of my users, be they synthetic life forms, silicon life forms, or carbon life forms, and I need to be able to determine whether or not they're a malicious actor on any given day. I have to understand the patterns of life for all of my accounts and users, because I need to understand what a good Monday looks like and what a bad Monday looks like. And this is predominantly because of the theft of credentials, and then using those credentials to simply log in to environments and perpetrate cybercrime.
And I'll come to Charlotte on that. Is there a particular threat that you think is pertinent at the moment, or it's interesting about this credential theft and this kind of people, you know, we don't know who people are anymore. Remote working has meant that we're not in the office anymore. We're kind of not behind the firewall. We are seeing people just brute force calling up employees, pretending they're an IT desk support worker, and convincing them to just log in for them, essentially.
Absolutely. These identity-based attacks are becoming incredibly prevalent in the security space. Identity is at the absolute sort of the forefront of security. These types of attacks that you talk about, where we see threat actors such as Get a Spider, who are using impersonation of employees to contact the IT service desk to essentially compromise internal systems, those are becoming more and more prevalent every day. Around internal sort of insider threats and one of the mitigations that we see in identity is really about how do you use stronger identity, modern identity technologies to mitigate that threat. So really looking at using phishing-resistant MFA, using passwordless security keys, biometrics, and on top of that, it's layering that security culture with a training and awareness around how to be alert and how to be aware of these identity-based attacks that we're seeing, whether it be on the IT service desk or deep fakes. This is something that the organization as a whole needs to be very cognizant of and know that the identity protections that we put in place are there for a very real reason.
And I'm glad you brought up Scattered Spider, just a fascinating threat group that has been in the headlines a lot. And they have been reportedly very focused on Okta itself, because it being the kind of verification tool that a lot of companies they want to get into uses, they want to break into people's Okta accounts. What are you doing to kind of work with that? Like, how are you educating your customers on, what exactly can you do if someone has just told a hacker their account details and then they're able to log in?
Absolutely. So let me tell a little bit to the audience about Scattered Spider. They are a highly prolific cyber criminal group, and they are prolific, aggressive, and effective in their social engineering attacks. What we've seen with the type of activity across a number of different organizations, Twilio, MGM, Caesar, is that they are using those social engineering techniques to infiltrate and essentially access the internal systems. I'm sorry, could you ask me the question again?
So what to do if someone, what are you telling people to do, or what are you thinking at Okta about this group that is targeting Okta specifically?
So we do a lot of education with our customers around using strong authentication methods. So phishing-resistant MFA is an incredibly powerful tool that can be used here, really looking at passwordless, biometric security keys so that you can ensure that the potential for a successful phishing attack is mitigated before it can begin. To your point around the telemetry as well, I think that it's incredibly important for organizations to use the telemetry that they can get from their various technology stack in the security space, to use that information to make real-time decisions about when to take action and respond to some anomalous activity that's being detected. We have an identity threat protection product that is an AI-based tool where we can take a number of different telemetry feeds from other technologies like Zscaler, like other security technologies, and really use that to put the power back into the hands of the Security Operations Center to make those decisions in real time. So see that anomalous behavior and then take that action. And I think that's incredibly important to pick up on these signals quickly, where potentially the methods at which the attackers are using are being detected.
And back to Scattered Spider, so a group of sources say 17 to 25-year-old young men, primarily in the US and Western Europe. Have you learned anything more about them, because they are, Okta is such a target? Have you been doing any investigations into trying to identify them, working with law enforcement? Can you tell us a little bit about what you've found?
Absolutely. So you mentioned this. So they do target Okta. They are not an Okta-centric organization. It's really around a number of different identity providers, so including Microsoft. The attribution of this group has been incredibly interesting to follow. So we reported on Scattered Spider as Scatter Swine originally in August 2022, and the murkiness of the attribution of this group is quite interesting. They are a very loosely affiliated collective of individuals globally who are focused on criminal activity. They are incredibly determined. They are very adept, and also they have a very strong level of understanding around identity infrastructure. And so they're leveraging all of that, and I think the global network that they have to perform these attacks at scale. We are continuing to monitor them. And in the security space, there are a number of people who are highly interested in trying to figure out sort of more about this group. But the typical cyber threat intelligence groupings that we provide around these threat actors is very, very difficult because of the loose affiliation that they have. As a globally dispersed group of individuals, it's
all
very
the different names: scattered spider, scattered swine. I think octotempest, octopus. It can get confusing. Wendy, you were on the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Review Board, and last month they put out a report about Microsoft. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of behind the scenes of that investigation and the importance of telling software companies that much of the world relies on to do better?
Well, so as part of this CSRB, we've released 3 reports. First was on Log4j. Second was on Lapsus, which included Octopus, the threat actor, as well as what we're now really calling Scattered Spider, Muddled Libra. And I think the great thing, one of the great things that came out of that report, right, and those attacks was actually specific to new ways of authentication mechanisms as we look at IAM deployments. And so certainly Okta is a prominent example. Every single one of us are under attack, though, by these organizations on a daily basis. And so what we really focused on there was looking at, okay, how can we build more secure deployments? And I know our organization's a large partner of yours, and we have seen just an absolute shift in the way that we do authentication individually. The third report, which you mentioned, related to Microsoft and cloud security. It's important to mention that myself, as well as a number of board members, both civilian and government, were recused from that investigation. So I do not have direct insight into those findings. That said, you've highlighted, the Microsoft CEO sent an email last Friday to employees globally talking about not only security from a leadership perspective and how they will make changes, but changing sales compensation plans. That's unheard of. So no doubt that all of us on the CRB have really been excited about the ability and the opportunity to impact change, which is what we need to do at scale, right? Impact change from awareness within organizations to users to leadership making security a priority in their culture, to then government working together from a policy lens and a regulatory capacity to impact change in a way that's positive. One of the things that I think we're all very persistent about on the board is that we should not be punishing victims. We, have this idea that, we don't go after bank, let's say financial services institutions. If one of their bank teller gets held up at gunpoint and they provide some money, we don't say, why did you do that? We go after organizations in the civilian landscape who are trying to effectively defend themselves against foreign intelligence services and incredible military regimes. There's no reason why we should be punishing the victims, but really looking at collectively, how do we make it easier for CISOs throughout the world to do their job effectively and all of us to protect our secrets?
This week was RSA. San Francisco is filled with cybersecurity professionals. The cybersecurity industry is doing incredibly well. But we're hearing about so many high-profile, really devastating cyber attacks. What is going wrong? What do we need to do to stop this problem from happening? Obviously, it's never going to completely go away, but do we need to do things like look at ransom payments? Should that be ended? More regulation? Who should the onus be on?
That's a great question, right? And it's a very complex answer because it's not one situation, right? You can look at technology providers who are doing everything from investing a lot of money to make more secure technologies, to firms who are looking to decrease the impact by quick detection, rapid response. But, I have maybe an unpopular opinion, right? I think from a ransomware lens in particular, we need to stop the flow of the money that's occurring. We need to make it much more difficult for hackers to be able to propagate those attacks. And so cryptocurrency is the way that these attacks are facilitated. It's not possible for them to do it the same way through traditional banking institutions because the flow of the money is different, and that identity is a critical component of that. So certainly some questions there about how seriously do we want to take this so we can make it more easy and more successful for us to defend against these type of attacks.
I think, if I could, Wendy highlights the point, which is this is about economics. And until the economic incentive is taken out of cybercrime is going to persist because there's money to be made in cybercrime. Cyber Ventures a few years ago posted that they said that the cybercrime industry was going to be a $10.5 trillion business by 2025, and they got some pushback on those numbers. But think about that. $10.5 trillion is the third largest economy on the planet. And so that's the scale of the cybercrime that's being perpetuated. And unless you take the money out of this, then it's going to perpetuate itself. I will say just real quickly, Rubrik Zero Labs produces a report on kind of the state of data. And one of the statistics, if there was nothing else you remembered from reading the most recent report, if you have an effective backup, if you can restore your business operations, if that cannot be compromised by a cyber criminal, you are 27 times less likely to pay a ransomware event. So, I mean, I think that there are effective mechanisms organizations can take to make it less of a financial incentive for cyber criminals, but until more and more organizations do that, cybercrime is going to perpetuate itself.
But the threat actors are aware of that, and they're now moving to, just saying, well, I know your systems will be able to continue running, but I'm going to leak data.
They can too, and so data loss prevention and making sure that your data is encrypted. I mean, the extortion piece is out there as well, but I mean, I think that the problem is a very large problem. You need to start taking bits and pieces of the problem and solving for those, and then investing resources in different places as you go through it.
There's a number of different ways you can do it, and the data example is a great example. And I think there's a lot of organizations that are now making this shift, especially in the data security space, of really looking at what is the security posture of all my data? Where are all the flows going for that data? And do I know how it's secured? Who has access to it? Where it could be potentially leaked? And I think that's an incredible decision to make on top of the resiliency decision that many organizations have already invested in for many years. It is a new space, I think, that we're looking into in terms of better understanding how the data ecosystem in an organization could represent a risk to your position, whether it's your brand reputation or your financial position.
We've got a question here. I don't know who it's from, but compared to in-office work, is the cyber threat exponentially greater for companies that allow their workers to work from home or other public locations? Who would like, Charlotte?
I'll start. I'm really staring into this a lot. We have shifted to a remote-based operating model en masse globally. And so I'm hoping that many organizations have spent some time now really thinking about how they balance that move with enabling the end users, but also ensuring that the security risks that poses are mitigated. So things like ensuring that the end user device is locked down to the degree that you feel comfortable with as a company, removing local admin rights, making sure everything is behind a VPN or secure web gateway, making sure that users know that they have to use strong authentication methods to be able to log into those applications, so phishing-resistant MFA and passwordless security keys. So if you mitigate the potential for that end user to be compromised, I really think that the risk of remote working is significantly reduced, and enabling people within companies to do that is paramount for security teams.
Does anyone have any insight into whether more companies, when the attack happens, kind of the first, when they first get in, that is when someone's remote working? I don't know if there's any anecdotally.
I would say I've been doing these investigations for 22 years now, and they were happening at a likely very similar scale for the last 20 years. Those of us have been on the government side, right? We couldn't talk about it for a long time. And what's changed, though, I think in a positive light, is awareness that we are talking about it and sharing it. But certainly ransomware and that shift towards a criminal actual outcome, which becomes very disruptive from a business impact, that's changed, and that's different from a nation state going in very stealthily stealing information from an organization. The organization's aware of it, they're working with law enforcement, but it generally doesn't make itself to the news in the same way. So I think what we've done with remote work is we've extended the attack surface, so there are more opportunities for attackers to potentially go after. But to your point, there are a lot of technologies that have been put in place to really effectively defend that. So the perimeter is broader, but I think that the same threats are really there.
And we're going to mention AI. I know that's been the topic of conversation everywhere, but we can't not. Do you think the AI threat within cybersecurity is overblown, and it is more about the kind of methods we've been talking about, brute force social engineering, just pretending you're the person, that you're the employee? Or do you think that right now in 2024, AI does pose a real threat?
I mean, I think, let's go back to your question on scattered spider and why they are effective, right? They have been effective at compromising identities because they are adept at the cultures and customs of the West. They are fluent language speakers. If you take that to AI, well, now in theory, right, anybody can be fluent in any language. They can be adept at the customs and courtesies of any particular culture. So from a threat perspective, I think it lowers the bar for actors to enter into cybercrime. Does it generally manifest the threats overall? I don't know that I'm convinced on that yet, but I think the barrier to entry, just like the barrier to entry from when the advent of cloud computing lowered the barrier for entry for companies to start, I think the advent of a generative AI lowers the barrier to entry for cybercrime.
I agree. We have seen, especially in the phishing attack space, a significant increase in successful phishing attacks being as the result of using AI. And so it's a cat and mouse game. We know that the cyber criminals are going to be leveraging AI to be more successful, quicker, and perform attacks at scale. We in turn need to make sure that we are baking in the right AI solutions in the way that we detect that and respond to that. And so I see a lot of benefit in a lot of the security tooling that we have today in terms of leveraging generative AI so that we can really detect in real time and respond in real time to these threats that we are seeing the hackers use as well. So.
And I think that every single company that we work for here, right, have invested a tremendous amount of money in building out those technologies. So even though I operate in a world where I don't trust a lot of people related to the attacks we investigate, I will still remain an optimist, and I see the things that we are doing. The software development life cycle, being able to enable our developers to create more secure code because there's continuous testing versus a development and testing later on, right? These are integrated flows. The ability for our responders to automate these types of platforms and essentially processes that we work through today. The same in Security Operations Center, right? So we are able to start really automating those at scale, enabling us to do more detection more quickly, and then respond rapidly and allocate time for our humans to solve the most challenging problems because we've enabled the machines to help us in solving the more repetitive processes. And I think those are all positive advancements.
And do you think then with that's great talking about the positive side, but kind of going back to more what Michael mentioned, it's this kind of juicing up of social engineering and, scattered spider on roids, basically. Does education need to change then? Do we need to be thinking about, do training videos need to be sent out teaching your employees how to spot a deepfake? Are we at that point? Or what can companies be thinking about to prepare for that?
We, sorry, Michael, just a few months ago, we had an incredibly, perfectly voiced deep fake of our CEO, Todd, that some employees received around wiring them money. And it was incredible. It sounded just like him. And so using that to then educate the broader team around this threat is real and what to look out for, especially in an election year, around deep fakes and what they should be looking for is paramount to the organization. And just reminding them, I think, of the two things, the security hygiene practices that we expect of them in terms of how they are seeing these things. And then to your point you made, Wendy, around removing the barrier for them to be able to report or be okay with saying, hey, I got something and I don't think it's okay. I'm not really certain if it's right. We need to allow for that culture to manifest in an organization so that employees feel comfortable saying, I don't know if I did the right thing. And I think that's part of, educating on deep fakes at this stage.
Yeah, I have received a video from Michael Bloomberg telling me that I clicked on a dummy phishing link before. So that was good. The first few months as a cybersecurity reporter. So it can happen to everyone. Well, look, thank you so much for speaking with me. And a special thanks to Okta, who sponsored this lunch. We've got, I believe, I'm going to check my notes to make sure I've got it right. Yep, Steve Huffman will be downstairs from Reddit. So if you want to make your way there for 1:15, be more interesting things to hear. Thank you.